Hola, bona tarda. S'escolta molt bé, crec, no? És un gran plaer, és un honor tenir un dels pensadors transhumanistes més importants i més influents del món aquí amb nosaltres. I'll pass to English. It's a pleasure to have you here. Thanks for accepting the invitation to discuss really important issues. Only if one thinks of the Nobel Prizes from this week, two of the Nobel Prizes are linked directly with artificial intelligence in physics and in chemistry, and the third Nobel Prize in medicine and physiology is connected to new developments in genetics that touch open the question of genetics. And these two issues are at the core of the transhumanist agenda, of the transhumanist vision, which is the topic tonight. So basically we have 1 hour, so I'll ask some questions to Anders Sandberg, and then 15 minutes of questions from you. I'll just say a few words about Anders. You allow me to call you Anders? Yes, already. Yeah, we met in a chat a little bit. So he actually comes from science, from computer science. He did his PhD in 2003. You finished your PhD on memory and computer science. But then he moved into philosophy, into futurology, touching open a variety of fields from neuroethics, of love, for instance, who is not interested in that, to assessing high-risk technologies, to dealing with distant future scenarios, and so on and so forth. A host of issues that are fascinating and important. So, as a way to begin this conversation, I wanted to point out to a fact that I think that our societies right now are in a sort of unprecedented paradox, and this unprecedented paradox is deeply related to developments which are accelerated in technology and science. On the one hand, our lives are increasingly dependent on technology and technoscience developments. On the other hand, these developments are increasingly unavailable in some sense, in two ways. One way is that they happen very, very fast, and ever faster. And the second reason is that they are hugely complex, right? To the point that even those who invent them do not fully understand them. Take, for instance, a fridge and an AI entity. A fridge is a tool, and we actually can understand how it functions. We can understand how inner workings. If you compare that with an AI entity, you realize that there are certain uncanny, disturbing, unsettling, but also exhilarating things going on. First of all, an AI entity creates new knowledge. It's also an agent or a quasi-agent taking decisions. The Nobel Prize on chemistry was based actually on the capacity of the three researchers to come up with an AI model in order to predict something extremely complex that is at the basis of our lives, that is the behavior of proteins, right? So AI entities. The second point is that the AI entities have an immense capacity of learning. And they learn faster, actually, than human beings, especially in certain areas. This is connected with the third element, namely that in certain areas, the AI entities have become already more intelligent than us. Obviously, a question is what is actually intelligence. But anyway, they do faster and they understand faster than us in certain areas. And the last characteristic is related to the question of complexity. actually those who deal with these entities based on machine learning, fast machine learning, do not fully understand them. This is something that the so-called godfather of artificial intelligence, the one who received the prize, the Nobel Prize some 4 days ago, Geoffrey Hinton, argues. Like, we introduced he argues, we introduced the learning algorithm in the machine, but what the machine does with it is so hugely complex that we actually are unable to fully understand. He refers to him, that is, to the inventor, not the commoners like me, right? So this is uncanny. This is, I think, unprecedented. Obviously, throughout human history, we produced a host of technological tools, but these tools have a different nature which affects fundamentally our civilization, the way you relate to each other, and increasingly so. So we need to understand that. We need orientation. We need visions. And one of the key visions is incarnated by Anders Sanders here, is the so-called transhumanism, which is a very controversial term. Francis Fukuyama actually, in one article some 20 years ago, considered it to be the most dangerous idea there is. So we are curious and we want to start a bit the inquiry, which I think it will be too short. So the first question is biographical, if you want. I mean, you started with an interest in the past, in the question of memory, but then you moved into the future and also into the distant future. So could you very briefly give us a sense of your main inspirations and how you got there?
Well, thank you so much for that opening, and thank you for coming in to listen to me ramble on. I grew up in Sweden in the 1970s, and it was a staid, boring place. So I read all the science fiction novels at the local library, dreaming about a future that was different rather than the high-rise concrete buildings that were surrounding me. And I've always been interested in what can we say about the future? And maybe we can't predict the future, but we can make the future happen. So that is why I started studying science. And at university, I began in computer science because that seemed to be a good topic. And then I discovered neural networks. I did my PhD on this topic, both because it was a really interesting issue of making computers think like the human brain. That was a bit what is the underlying current artificial intelligence, except that now it works. It didn't work very well when I was working on it. But memory is really the fundamental for artificial intelligence, because we don't know what rules you should put into the computer to make it do things. You want it to learn, you want it to experience things and then find the ways of doing. And then that learning allows it to be intelligent. So I helped some research there, but I was mostly interested in the human mind. And I got interested in, can we make human brains work better? Memory, my memory was not very good. Could I improve it? I learned about memory arts, where people could memorize large amount of information by making rhymes or stories about it, but also about drugs that could improve memory. So that got me interested. So I started researching about that. And that was when I got my PhD, and I had to look around in the world to see, where do I go now? And I got an invitation from the newly started Future of Humanity Institute at Oxford University, run by Nick Bostrom. And he invited me over because they needed somebody who understood brains, because we were doing a project about cognitive enhancement. And Nick Bostrom, like me, has a keen interest in the long-term future. He's also a transhumanist. And we had many conversations, both about how the future could go very well, but also how it could go disastrously wrong. So much of our research has been about this tension between grandiose positive futures, maybe lasting for trillions and trillions of years, and devastating disasters that we really want to avoid. So that's how I ended up here.
Yeah. Thank you for this. It's important to keep in mind the Future of Humanity Institute and also the polemic that surrounded it. It was closed, this well-known institute in Oxford with connection to the Silicon Valley. It was closed in April. And there was a public controversy about it. For instance, the Guardian articles from the period, that is from 5 months ago, speak with respect to the vision of this institute as eugenics on steroids, right? So I mentioned this because I want to make a step back and to ask a really basic question. What is transhumanism at the end of the day, and how is this connected with posthumanism? I mean, these are used sometimes interchangeably. There is a lot of confusion about it. So if you can put on the table some basic definitions.
So classical humanism, as it emerged during the Renaissance and Enlightenment, was the idea that humans matter, human lives matter and can be made better. Maybe by education, that was the main focus, but also by having societies that are free and open. Transhumanism says, that's great, but we still age. Our brains are still stupid. We could perhaps do something about that. So transhumanism wants to use technoscience to improve on the human body and mind in the ways humans find valuable. Now, there is another movement, post-humanism, that often get confused with transhumanism. Post-humanists think that the humanists are so obsessed with humans. Why are we thinking so much about this species when there are other species around? There is a biosphere and an Earth out there. Maybe we should decenter from the human. So they critique very much the anthropocentric biases of current academia. But much of that has very little to do with transhumanism. So quite often transhumanists and post-humanists don't get along. They don't understand what the others are even talking about. I try to sometimes be a peacemaker between them. It usually doesn't work, but it's sometimes interesting discourses.
Yeah. So you basically, what you're saying is that post-humanism transhumanism and humanism, there is a continuity between them, right?
Yeah.
In the sense that there is a belief in human life, if I understand it correctly, in progress, and in human rationality, but not rationality in general. Not rationality in general, but in techno-scientific terms. This is what is transhumanism is about.
Now, transhumanism is a very broad movement. You will find some transhumanists who disagree with practically everything I say. But I think in general, transhumanism is very much a continuation of this idea that humanity is worth saving and can become better. Now, many transhumanists also say, but we can become so radically better and different in the future that we become something new. Not human, but transhuman, or maybe even post-human. And this is, of course, where things get really controversial. The reason Francis Fukuyama really didn't like transhumanism was he argued that the best thing for humans is to live an excellent human life. We can't want to live a post-human life. That's a different species. I disagree with him. I argue that actually it's a very human thing to want to be better, to be able to think things that you couldn't do, control your emotions or feel new emotions that weren't possible before.
I'm struck by one phrasing that you used. Humanity is worth saving, right? So I mentioned this because some argument that actually transhumanism is a sort of new religion with different tools that is focused on a sort of like salvation, right? So, and it's true. I mean, if you look at and it's true for sure to some extent, because if you look at least to some types of transhumanism, they want to fuse technoscience directly and openly with religion, while others say, well, religion is a thing of the past, we really need to get over that. There is, funnily enough, for instance, a Mormon association, just to be concrete, a Mormon transhumanist association. There are also loads of parties that are transhumanist. Even in Spain, there is a transhumanist party, in case you didn't know. So they had a few days back a anti-aging manifestation in Madrid. So I wanted to ask you a little bit more about this complexity of the transhumanist movement, because it seems to me that this is a very minimalist definition that you give, but then the controversies start. Yeah. For instance, you say humanity is to be saved, but in what you developed, you actually allude to the fact that maybe if you follow the transhumanist agenda, actually we forget about humanity. We just developed a different species, right? So could you maybe detail a little bit, maybe the potential religious aspect and also the relationship with the human, in the sense that what remains as human in the transhumanist agenda?
So most transhumanists tend to be non-religious or agnostic, but there is also a surprisingly large group of Buddhist transhumanists. So they take the psychological ideas in Buddhism about letting go of attachment and actually avoiding suffering as important tools, and then we can enhance that using technology. But there are indeed Christian transhumanists. And you could totally construct a Christian transhumanism. You can say that maybe God wants us to become like this. Indeed, the Russian mystic and librarian Nikolai Fyodorov constructed his own early form of transhumanism called cosmism based on this. It's very peculiar, it's very Russian, but he concluded, and this was back in Tsarist Russia, that God wants us to use science to become immortal and then go to space. He inspired Nikolai Tsiolkovsky, the guy who came up with actual rocketry, who in turn was the mentor for Korolev, the engineer who actually built the Soviet rocket, and was the mentor of Yuri Gagarin. Just 3 steps from a slightly weird librarian to the first man in space. But you can equally well say God doesn't exist. We are all in this existentialist world where we get to create our own meaning. And now it's up to us to create ourselves to be good by whatever standards set up. So the problem for transhumanism, especially if you're a philosopher like me, is that it doesn't have a built-in value in the system. It doesn't have an explanation of why. So you get transhumanists that want things for different ways. I have a friend who wants to stop aging because she doesn't like wrinkles and she doesn't like having gray hair. That's a very practical reason, and I think it might be a good reason for her, but still it might not be a reason to transform humanity. Other people say, yeah, but humanity has so much consciousness, knowledge, wisdom. We have this long-running project that has a lot of value. It would be a disaster if we died out. We have a duty to try to survive as long as possible. That's also problematic. But now, because now instead of God, we have the species. I don't know how you motivate that, or rather, I can do a lecture where I'm doing it, being in the philosophy department. But I think there are many ways you can motivate transhumanism. So it's a little bit like the political left. Most people there think that justice and equality are important, but some think that Marx is important. Others denounce Marx. Some people think certain principles are what defines a proper leftist. Others disagree. Yet, together they can, of course, quite often form a coalition. Now, the tricky part here is, of course, also defining even human. Should we define human very narrowly, like just beings like us, or should we also include higher primates and maybe sentient animals? I have many friends who are deep into the animal rights movement that think that actually we happen to be the species running the planet right now, but that means that it's not just that we shouldn't destroy the environment. We might also try to help the animals. Indeed, some have argued that maybe we should try to make dogs more intelligent so they can understand us and we can understand them better. That's going to be good for both species. Others argue that actually life might be artificial. Those AI programs that we're creating, right now they are probably not conscious. They probably don't matter morally. But one day they might. And at that point we need to give them rights. Otherwise we would be doing something morally atrocious. And we need to work hard on establishing the right understanding of that. And indeed, as some transhumanists say, yeah, we should be merging with the machines. By connecting ourselves to computers, we might actually get the best of both sides. Maybe the human the wonderful world of consciousness and the power of a machine, or other properties that we don't even know yet are worth having.
One of the things that strikes me reading, for instance, the transhumanist declaration made of 8 points. That's from the late 80s, the variety of text, is a connection with liberalism, namely a connection with the idea of maximizing the control over our lives. So there is a sort of a myth of the almighty individual, whereby basically the question of your appearance or of your hair or, I don't know, your sex becomes a question of pure choice. That is everything. And basically you are in a sort of fantasy supermarket where this individual puts together, as it were, his own feature or her own feature or the future of the offspring or maybe of the citizens and so on. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about this, because for sure people like Ron Kurzweil really seem to fall for this myth of the almighty, almost godlike individual. So do you see there a connection or not? For me, one of the values of, and with this I finished the question, one of the values of post-humanist authors and critiques like Braidotti is a thinker who actually came a few times to Barcelona, is that they want to question and to do away with this myth of the autonomous, almighty individual that has been so pernicious, for instance, with respect to, I don't know, destruction of nature and so on and so forth. So what do you...
Much of modern transhumanism got shaped by what you could call the Californian ideology in the 1980s and early 1990s. So in the Bay Area in California, which encompasses not just Silicon Valley, but also San Francisco, you had the meeting between high technology and the hippies. The idea that individuals should be able to shape their lives as they want. And this can be framed in a very classical liberal way. John Stuart Mill was talking about that we need experiments in living, and government and society should not interfere with our lives in that. And much of modern liberalism is very much based on we should be autonomous to shape our lives as we want. And California, of course, takes this to the next level. So much of this Californian style of transhumanism is very individualistic, and I regard myself very much as an exponent of that. But I have friends that actually regard themselves as socialist transhumanists. You can totally construct a collectivist view saying that we want to enhance ourselves together. We want to make new technologies available, but they need to be available to all, and that means that we need to do it as a society. And I, of course, end up in long political arguments with them, but I still get along with them because I think we're on the same side. We want to improve things. It's just that we disagree about the politics. You can, of course, do nastier forms of transhumanism. You can imagine a fascist transhumanism.
Of course.
Indeed, I think I know at least one actual fascist transhumanist. I strongly disagree with him. I think he's morally wrong. But there is an interesting question here about how the tools get used. And the individualism, I think, is a safeguard against misuse. If the government can tell us what kind of bodies and minds we should have, that's very dangerous. We have seen in the past how bad that goes. So we need to safeguard that. I propose that we have a right to morphological freedom. We have a right to shape our bodies as we see fit, or say, no, I don't want my body reshaped. That's equally important. Now, a more collectivist transhumanist might say it's important to do this together with others. Indeed, my work on the enhancement of love involves the problem that if you want to use neurotechnologies to improve your love life, there is at least one other person involved in that process. And that means that suddenly you have obligations to other people. It's not just you. So I think in practice, it's rarely about just one individual. But I think it's a good starting point to put down some rights there. And then we might discuss, okay, are we going to put this also on the tax system? Is the healthcare system going to provide certain enhancement or life extension treatments? Should I do certain things with my body that is good for everybody else, but maybe not for me? I think personally, I think it's a good debate to have. But first we need to, of course, agree that there are some things that shouldn't be done.
You are very worried about the government not telling us about the morphology of the bodies. I'm a little bit more worried about the Silicon Valley mavericks inducing people into some morphological experimentalism. But I want to hold on.
But it's one thing to do stupid experiments. If you can be responsible for doing something with your body, I think that works. I'm more worried about things like beauty ideals that make everybody run off to the gym and train, even though it might not be good for them. But those ideals, the way of confronting them is to debate them.
Yeah.
The real problems might, of course, be that when you get centralized powers, and indeed you can get centralized corporate powers that are just as bad as centralized government power.
I want to make a step back without forgetting the political question, right? I'll go back to the political question, which I think is fundamental. Just to and before speaking about, I don't know, trans dogs, or something like that, I just wanted to ask you to get a better grasp of what you mean by transhumanism, to ask you, if you look at the existing reality, not to the future, to the existing reality, which phenomena, which currents, which type of discoveries you'd call already as transhumanists? And then you move towards the future if you agree into politics.
Yeah. So I think the most common example of something that is a directly transhuman technology is something that I think most of us have in our pockets. These smartphones, we're never alone. We're never lost. We never forget, well, more or less. We're also connected to this vast network that contains all human knowledge and also monitors where we are and has all sorts of complex social effects. When I built a wearable computer back in the 1990s, it was clunky and funny looking, but it didn't have Wi-Fi. I didn't consider how important it was to be networked. And that networking has actually enhanced us at a certain price too. We also, of course, use medications today to help extend our lives. Many diseases that used to be a death sentence, today many cancers are chronic diseases. We can treat them. So we are seeing more and more that we medicalize everything. Again, that's not always a smart move. Some things are just natural and we can accept that, but it's also helping us modify our lives quite a bit.
So you'd refer to a cancer treatment as a sort of transhumanist therapeutic methodology?
Yeah.
Okay, so you use transhumanism in a very broad sense.
I do. I think our biological nature is not given. We have ended up like we are right now because of biological past, but now we're increasingly modifying that, whether that is by plastic surgery or going to the doctor and getting a vaccine. After all, the vaccines are a global technological immune system, something that I think is a beautiful, wonderful achievement, but we should recognize that this is a form of enhancement. We don't get the epidemics in the same way anymore, and that is a great thing.
Now the future.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit worried about the time. So the future is a big thing. So I propose you to distinguish between the near future, let's say within 10 years, where would you see the transhumanist agenda going, then the medium term between 10, 50 years, and far future of transhumanism, right? For instance, Kurzweil, he says, well, the singularity, if you could explain that, will occur, well, in 20 years, right? So could you explain a little bit what's your vision about the near, the medium term, and distant future?
Yeah. So I think the near future, much is going to be debates about medicine, and especially forms of medicine that are also a bit of enhancement. Especially this is especially relevant for life extension. In the lab, we know how to slow down aging of lab rats and other organisms fairly well. Taking those methods and using them medically on people to slow down our aging, or at least prevent aging-related diseases, seems doable. A lot of money is flowing into the field. Many companies are trying to develop therapies that can do this. Most of them are going to fail, but I bet some of them are going to succeed. And 10 years down the line, it's going to be fairly normal to take medications that slow down your aging slightly. 20 years further ahead, they're probably going to be much more powerful. And of course, since you now age more slowly, you have a better chance of being around 20 years and 30 years and 40 years ahead. There is already people using drugs to enhance the cognition. the classical the picture is a student taking a drug to improve memory and executive capacity so they can think better. These drugs are still relatively weak, but I think they're useful and they can be improved. And there's going to be a big political debate about when they are appropriate and when they're inappropriate. We might debate about whether students should be taking them, but what about surgeons? What about political leaders spending all night negotiating? Sleep deprivation is really bad for decision ability, and maybe we should wish our political leaders to have good decision ability when they do complicated negotiations. At the same time, artificial intelligence is advancing rapidly. That's kind of a competitor to human intelligence, but it's also going to allow us to just ask questions and get answers, speed up research. Many technologies in biotechnology and nanotechnology are probably going to accelerate tremendously over the next 20 and 30 years because of artificial intelligence. And once you have methods to more easily make new molecules, new organisms, new machines, that, of course, makes it easier to make further development. And this is what Ray Kurzweil calls the singularity. He got the word from Vernor Vinge, another philosopher and science fiction author, who was arguing that this seems to accelerate and maybe it goes off to infinity. In mathematics, a singularity is where a mathematical curve goes off to infinity. And he was using it mostly metaphorically. Nobody really believes that we suddenly go off to infinity. But things can change much faster. As we have been seeing in the artificial intelligence world, it can change much faster than the experts believed was even possible. I remember being very shocked in 2012 that, wow, these systems actually start to work. And then every year ever since, I've been surprised that, oh, it's improving faster than I expected. I have constantly had to update my views on the future, that the future is much closer than I expected. At the same time, as a middle-aged transhumanist, I also know that quite often things get delayed. In the 1990s, we believed nanotechnology would emerge rather soon and would transform the materials and manufacturing around us. It didn't happen, mostly for sociological reasons, but that has so far been a failure. I think it's going to change. Space didn't seem like it was going anywhere, and then Elon Musk showed up, and actually now a lot of things are happening in space. So our ability to predict the future is still pretty limited. So I think the midterm, that's where things get wild, because it's still our world. We are probably around, but we can enhance ourselves. We can link to computers. We have powerful systems at our disposal, but we still have the same old humans and our lack of wisdom. So this is also a very dangerous time. In the long run, I think humanity, if we survive, we are going to become whatever we want to become, which is very hard to predict because people have a lot of different views. I hope that we will spread across space, explore different forms of consciousness, different modes of being. And I think that many people will say, no thanks. I want to live a totally normal life and have a beer with my friends at the bar and see my children play. And I think that's a good future. It's just that I also want there to be people in space who can actually survive in the vacuum of space and exploring the universe. I want there to be people who become software and explore what new modes of thinking are possible. That I want there to be many kinds of post-humanity. That is kind of my biggest hope. My fear is, of course, that something goes wrong, and not that it doesn't happen, but it happens and goes badly. This is why Nick Bostrom and me spent so much time working on global disasters. We were thinking that if the future could become really, really good, it could also become really bad. We need to do something about that.
I'm struck by what you say, we're going to be whatever you want to, which seems to go back to this, what I was referring to, this myth of the godly individual who...
But isn't that also true for societies? Many societies want to become a more virtuous society or a better society or just more of themselves. I think maybe my view is the liberal one, that we create a lot of different societies, because I'm fearful of somebody uniting all mankind in one particular direction. That sounds like a dangerous move. But I do think that many people are going to do this together. Because honestly, individuals are not very good at building new technologies. Most technologies only work because a lot of people not only make them, but also use them and figure out what they're good for.
there is still a strong intuition that societies are not made of the wheels of the individuals, just as our lives is determined by events, by randomness, by good luck, by bad luck. So in this sense, I'm a little bit maybe skeptical about this voluntaristic understanding of society.
Yeah. So I might be a liberal, but I'm also trying to finish a big, thick book I'm writing together with a professor of jurisprudence in Sweden. And it's about legal systems and artificial intelligence. And one of the things that we have been thinking a lot about is, what is law? What is markets? What are social institutions? And we argue it's a form of extended cognition. Just like you might imagine making your brain function better by making the brain better, we can also share brains. We can actually do thinking between brains. A lot of what happens at courts and in government departments is that many brains are working together using a lot of pieces of papers and electronic signals to make things as a group. That was not possible for the individuals. And these structures, quite often they're normative. They tell others what to do. We are now in a former prison, which is kind of the ultimate expression of the strength of normative power. There is this abstract law that defines what you're allowed and not allowed to do, and then people enforce it. But most worrisome, most of us obey the laws even when the police is not present. Why do we do that? Well, we know that some laws make sense, and sometimes we're worried that the police might see us, but also our mothers all told us that we should be law-abiding, at least up to a point, depending on how anarchistic your mothers were. But in general, these normative structures affect us. We're part of these collective minds. And this is where I agree with you, that the individualistic focus might be missing something important. I'm still very willing to criticize these normative structures because I think some of them are very dangerous. Again, we're in a prison where the normative structure was deadly. But I also think that there is an opportunity to try to create better structures.
Okay, so I want to, for you to maybe develop concretely, or already have given some inklings, some examples of what you see as some positive developments within the transhumanist development. So would you give some examples, for instance, of positive cognitive enhancements or of the positive dimension, and then we move to the potential harms.
So I have been thinking a lot about cognitive enhancement, ways of improving memory, and some of these drugs are developed for treating Alzheimer's, but we also work in healthy people. And if you use them in the right way, you can improve what you learn, which seems to be exactly what we want to do in school. We want to do many other things at school too. It's not just about learning, it's about becoming a better person, and it's about testing people. But if we know what we do, how to use them well, we can actually improve our education. Similarly, we might want to slow down aging. I've been returning to this often, but every day 150,000 people around the world die of aging and age-related diseases. That's a horrifying number. If there was a disease going around, a pandemic that killed that many people per day, we would say, we need a vaccine now. Why isn't the government doing anything? But now we're used to this. That doesn't mean that you become immortal because you stop aging, because traffic is still dangerous. There are still diseases. There might be good reasons to want to end your life once you're done with what you feel you want to do. But that should be a choice rather than that one day you're unlucky and your heart stops working. I think this would be very positive. It would also force us to reframe how we live our lives. Because how long a life is going to depend on how long it's meaningful to live. We have already invented ages in life, like being a teenager. Previously, you were a child and then you were grown up. But as societies developed and as we needed more education, we added more years in this intermediate period. And these days, you're a teenager in Sweden until you're 35 years old, or when you move away from your parents, whatever comes first. We have made teenagers a much longer period. Similarly, old age. It used to be that you retired and then you lived a few years, but now you can have a long retirement and quite often do a lot of things. But other people are too sick to do anything good after retirement. So they're not getting the same benefit as others who are traveling and starting their second company. I think similarly, connecting to computers might be important. Elon Musk is worried about artificial intelligence becoming too powerful and dangerous. So he suggested that we need to link our brains to computers. And sometimes he says, that's just so we can be smarter than the computers. I think that's going to be very hard, but it would be a good thing if we could become smarter. Another way of reasoning might be, well, if you're connected to the computers and if the computers take over the world, then you're on the winning side. But that's also not true. You might still be on the wrong side, political side of computers. But I think the real value is you can have computers that actually detect your values. Because the hard and scary problem in artificial intelligence is to make machines that understand what we truly want. And this is very hard to explain. I can tell a robot what I want, but that's the words. My feelings are much harder to convey, and many of my feelings I don't even know until I have them. If I could connect the robot to my mind, and the robot could check what I'm actually feeling and why, it would be much safer. It would be much more likely to actually do what I want. So when the robot considers, should I push a person in front of a car? No, Anders really hates the idea. Why? He's got compassion. Okay, that compassion thing, I need to include that in my decision process. It's still a hard technical problem, both to get the neural interface and the robot to want to understand it. But I think this connection might actually allow us to make ethical technology. Of course, as ethical as we are, but we still need work on our ethics. We need to figure out ways of doing moral enhancement, so we're not done here.
Yeah. There is so much to unpack there. I'm also a little bit worried. I hope you're not speaking too fast for the translator. Is okay? Okay, so I just wanted to ask you a straightforward question about aging, pain, death, suffering, things that come up in your discourse. Now, in the whole philosophical, spiritual, religious tradition or traditions, from Buddhism to Confucianism to whatever, these are considered to be connected with meaningfulness, right? They have ethical signification. Do you consider aging, death, as mere technical problems, as sort of errors of evolution that we, the all-powerful and omniscient humans, are to overcome and solve by technoscientific means?
Most of these religious and philosophical views don't regard the pain and suffering and death as good in themselves. Usually when the priest gives a sermon about it, he will tell you that withstanding the pain, learning how to live with suffering is going to make you a better person, because now you're more robust. Now you can handle new situations in the right way. You might learn humility and other virtues. It's not that the pain is a good thing. It may be useful as a teacher, but that's about it. And in views like Buddhism, of course, you want to end suffering. Suffering is bad. And getting rid of it technologically or by detachment is a good thing to do. Now, the problem is, of course, that if we solved aging like that, there would still be lack of energy. If we solved the lack of energy, we would have problems with climate change. There is always some other problem. Some of these problems are self-made. We might just constantly get annoyed at things that are not as perfect as we wish them to be. Many people swear at their phones when they're a little bit slow, and their cars, wonderful tools, are yet not always fast enough. But the really important thing is there might be problems that simply cannot be solved at all, no matter how enhanced you are. Mm-hmm. But there are many practical problems I think we ought to solve. Again, when people say we need to accept aging and death because they're natural, but I usually ask, so should we learn how to accept tyranny and oppression? Because they are also natural things. Most societies throughout history have been full of oppression. The problem here is, of course, that we are normally thinking that, yeah, it's right to rebel against oppression. We know that sometimes works. Sometimes it's painful, sometimes it's dangerous, but it's a good thing that we do it. We are still suffering from the idea that maybe it's something good about aging. And I think once it's solved, people are going to say, hey, isn't it strange how many people supported aging? it's almost like the people who supported tyranny before we got democracy.
I wanted to pass to the, let's say, bleaker part of it, to the potential harms, or actually the current harms that we can see that accompany some of the developments that are connected with artificial intelligence. And I think it can distinguish a variety of harms. I'll start from your phone, because you showed a phone and say, well, this is an example of transhumanism. And there is a video, Kurzweil, when he takes out the phone and says, well, isn't that wonderful? And just imagine in 10 or 15 years, we won't need this apparatus. We'll have the phone in our head, right? So if you want to write an WhatsApp, you just think about the WhatsApp, and through your chip, you transmit it directly to another mind, of your beloved, of your mother, or of whatever. Now, to me, this is related to, I don't know, maybe almost silly psychology, if you'll allow me to be a little bit polemic, because if you think of the empirical research concerning the impact of mobile phones on human relations, educations, children, and so on and so forth, the correlation between the use of mobile phones and mental, depression and other mental diseases, it seems to me that this sort of optimism has or tends to have a sort of simplified understanding of how we work. So, for instance, what about the potential harm, the connection with mental conditions and mental diseases, or other issues such as, obviously, this is brought up time and again, and I think with good reason, a concern with the transformation of the nature of warfare, right? So enhanced humans or robots driven by AI, which in the hands of small group of powerful people or a small number of countries would lead to really great damage. What about inequality, right? Yeah. So the therapeutic, for instance, usage of genetics or genetic research, for instance, in general, aspires to a sort of equality, although in reality we know that there is no equality in the health system. If you go in, I don't know, in Raval, in the Cap, or in Saria, there are big differences. In contrast, the enhancement politics, as it were, is more directed towards difference. Like, I want to stand out, to have, more muscle, or to have a brilliant mind of a mathematician, and so on and so forth. So it's distinction and differentiation rather than equality. And it's worrying precisely because enhancement, most likely, or at least certain types of enhancement, would be connected with people who are richer, who have resources, who have the technologies, right? So there's a huge difference between, being born in a village in Ethiopia and being born with the Elon Musk of your father, to put it, right? So there's a worry that enhancement actually, and that's the third harm, enhances inequality. There is also the existential risk. That's another type of harm. I know you've been writing about this. So fake news as well, and the creation of echo chambers, which are so damaging for the current democracy and are driven by artificial intelligence. So of course there are people who try to build fair algorithms, right? And that's a noble and necessary enterprise. The thing is that there are quite a few powerful leaders out there, from Putin to whomever, and the number is growing, who are not into fair algorithms. Yeah. They're not into fair or minimally fair uses of these tools. So the worry is that these techno-scientific means, as exciting as it might be, generate or could generate really severe harm. So
yeah. So in summary, there could be downsides to new technology. Mm-hmm. That is basically what you said here, and I would love to respond in detail to all of this, yeah. But we would be here all evening. It would be a lovely evening, I can assure you, but it would be a long evening. But the deep problem is, Does technoscience produce only good results? No, we know it does not produce just good results. Does it produce only bad results? Obviously not. It's a mixture, and much of it is actually really good. I think the way of kind of trying to respond to your critique is to ask, if we look back 100 years, would we rather live back then than now? After all, most of us would indeed have been having to be industrial workers or farmers. We would have to carry water upstairs and to our flats. Heating would have been done using indoor stoves, producing a lot of pollution that would have actually harmed our lungs and given us shorter life. I can go on listing in all the ways our modern world is better. Globally speaking, we are richer. There is fewer really poor people in the world now. We have more knowledge and so on. I think we can make a pretty good case that the world today is better by practically all standards you care to set up than it was 100 years ago, and much of this is technoscience. That doesn't mean things are good today. We have climate change, we have nuclear weapons, we have looming threats that might obliterate our world, etc. So not every trend is going well. In fact, some of them are going dreadfully badly and we need to work on it. But I think the problem is that people generally assume that transhumanists say, yeah, new technology, we should be using all of it. That is stupid, because we need to use it carefully. Sometimes you need to think carefully before even bringing a technology into being, like we probably should have done more when doing nuclear weapons. Sometimes you need to experiment with the technology to learn what works and what doesn't work. Some of my friends are undergoing individual experiments on trying to slow their aging, and the rest of us are watching with interest to see whether they get cancer or get healthier. Now, that is still something that you need to fit with the different technologies. The problem is that we often assume that technology is one thing, and that it's just something that somebody offers. Here, take this, or leave it. But usually we can define it. Twitter didn't really work like current Twitter did from the start, because there was no hashtags. That was something users invented in order to find interesting conversations, and that suddenly made it useful. Many technologies, whether that is laptops or cell phones or genetic engineering, has to be defined by people. And this is where we have a chance to actually turn them into a better direction. Sometimes problems solve themselves. It turns out that I actually did have a chance to compare my cell phone to a mayor billionaire's cell phone, and he had one version later than me. And why? Well, Elon Musk probably has a fairly normal iPhone or Android phone too, because that is the power of mass production. The rich don't get some kind of super phone, except if they want to have a lot of diamonds and gold on it, and in that case, we don't need it anyway. In other domains, inequality stays, and that is dangerous, because typically it's the domains where it's services. If I can take a pill to slow down my aging, the price of that pill comes down as the patent expires on the drug, and the government might subsidize the anti-aging pills because a healthier population is just better for everybody. But if I need to go to a hospital and have doctors and nurses do some complicated thing, I need to pay the doctors and nurses their salary. That's going to be expensive. That might help inequality stay around, even though quite often, at least in European society, we again say it's so important that we want to put it on the tax bill. So there are ways of getting around these things. The problems I see that scare me the most are the ones that could end the whole world suddenly, that you need to coordinate against. Super intelligent artificial intelligences that solve some problem we don't want them to solve, and that destroys the world for humans. Bioengineering allowing any hacker to make a doomsday pathogen that becomes a pandemic. And various ways our software insecurities makes the global infrastructure crash. These things are what kind of keeps me up at night. They need to be stopped. In some cases, enhancement of solutions. In some cases, there is technology. In many cases, it's much more diplomacy and politics and economics we need to deal with.
A last question, because the organizers are fretting. So I really want to open the floor, and it's really a pity that that we have so little time. But
We need
afterwards, there'll be a
time.
treat with one of the most important philosophical voices, with Jacques Rancière. I see he's here already. So I wanted to ask you to go back as a last question to the political issue, or to the legal political issue, since you're writing on the legal question. If you look, in order to end on a promissory note, if you look at around the world, what's going on in order to, at the political and legal level, in order to mitigate the downsides of technological developments. And it's obvious that they're out there, just that the good, some good dimensions, obviously respect to medicine, right? Where would you look to? For instance, in Europe, we just adopted the Artificial Intelligence Act, which is severely criticized for emphasizing not the importance of the involvement of the citizen, but the importance of competition, with China, United States, and so on and so forth. In California, there was an attempt to adopt some regulatory measures, but they were actually rejected a few weeks ago. China is maybe more controlling, but is ambivalent when it comes to the question of harming. So where would you look for a model that would maybe anticipate transhuman democracy, maybe? A transhuman people?
So it's a funny thing that many of the leading people in the AI safety world come from transhumanism, because they took artificial intelligence seriously long before anybody else cared about it. And they also started to realize, this could be very dangerous. We need to solve the problem. So they got engaged with the debate very early on. And we have many grassroots movements like that, many that overlap quite heavily with transhumanism, although many of them are also strongly critical of transhumanism. What we can see in the open source movement, in the effective altruism movement, and many of other movements, is that today we can network globally. Many young people are forming global organizations that are not just demonstrating or sending petitions to governments, but organizing the money to be sent to good research, that are organizing to develop software that needs to be developed, that are sending lobbyists to Brussels and Washington to actually fix these things. Many of these people have later had career too. This has been going on for a while, and are now ending up in Brussels. They're ending up inside the big AI companies. Then they're ending up in the civil society organization outside, informing decision-makers and more senior diplomats about how this works. I think we're seeing a groundswell, actually, of the right kind of online democracy. Back in the 1990s, we imagined somewhat foolishly that we could all vote over the internet and that would be the global democracy. It didn't work very well. But the actual democracy is when you can start forming meaningful organizations online, when you can find other people globally and network. So many of the AI safety groups in the West, they have ways of interacting with AI safety groups in China. But think about the same problem, but from a very different angle, and they're exchanging information in a useful way. Sometimes, of course, a bit cautiously, because the Chinese Communist Party has opinions about the AI that you better not to criticize. But I think we have a lot of hope here. The fantastic thing about many of the new technologies is that they're easy to get. You can download them from the internet. You can build your little lab at home. That was not true for nuclear power. That was not true for the first computers. This is, of course, scary for some of the technologies, but it also is enormously empowering for us as ordinary citizens. I'm learning all the time from the youngsters in my office how to use these new technologies, because I'm a gray old man who doesn't understand modern technology, they tell me. So I'm trying to see if I can help these networks grow globally. And that might be the transhuman democracy you're hoping for.
There's a lot of optimism there. But I suggest to open the floor, and I'll take questions. If you could keep them short. Unfortunately, I have only 15 minutes. 1, 2, yeah, the first two. 1, 2, 3. We take them, these three together, and 4 over there. 4 questions we have. 5, wow. 6, but very short. Keep it short, please.
It's on.
This light is very cruel.
Well, thank you both for the conference. It's very interesting, and there are many things you said. I wanted to ask about something specific. You said about age-related things, that transhumanists are trying to
right, or you can...
like stop aging in a way. I wanted to ask if that's not related with the fear of death and ultimately trying to achieve some sort of immortality for ourselves.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have two questions there. Yes, please.
Now, or okay.
Yeah, please.
My question is, where do you place the concept of identity in this idea of transhumanism? Because we've mentioned, for example, mobile phones. And I think we all agree that we are not our mobile phones, and the memory of our phones are not our own memory. So we're talking about individuals in terms of transhumanism, but we're also talking about tools that allows us to be transhumans. So what's the concept of identity here?
Yeah.
Thanks so much. Yes, there is a hand over there.
I'm very concerned about inequality and democracy, but I think you approach that as well. And I'm concerned about something maybe a bit different. I think with the social media, they are good, of course, we like it, but I think we are converging to boredom and mediocrity. Mediocrity, sorry. Isn't there the danger that we all converge to something very, boring?
Yeah.
Behind there was a... Yes, please.
La meva pregunta era, la història de la ciència moltes vegades s'ha considerat, algú va dir que no era tant la història de les respostes, sinó la història de les preguntes. I en aquest sentit era preguntar-te quines creus que són les preguntes més importants en relació a la ciència i la tecnologia respecte al transhumanisme i quines altres preguntes s'estan fent ara que potser no són tan primordials, tan importants.
So, did you get the translation?
No.
So the question is, history of science can be understood, or should be understood as a history not of answers, but of questions. And to simplify a little bit the question, so what are the most relevant questions for you nowadays concerning the transhumanism? A very easy question. Yeah. So there was one question over there, and then you move to the other side. Yes, please be short.
Sorry. So I have a question about the, in our societies, previously, we are separated in different societies and different styles and different worlds in either way. But with the globalization, that is getting lost more and more. And for your version of transhumanism, could be that it's going to be separated again between societies that don't want to evolve in that way, but even different ways to evolve, like very different humans in different zones.
Yeah. Inequality, that goes back to the question inequality. Yes? There, you was there? I think, is there anybody else who dies to... Que té una pregunta, la mia pregunta? Bueno, la última, tens la última.
Vale. Okay, so phones, brain implants, the idea of death being an option, right, like a choice, these are very attractive. And the dangers, for example, of phones, we didn't know until they were in the hands of everyone. And things like this can bring attention hacking, people choosing to die before they should, because they have the choice. So how do we educate people on the implications before they get their hands on this? Or is that too paternalistic?
Okay, cool. So I've been using this amazing enhancement pen and paper here. It's so good for memory. So the first thing is the search for a long life due to fear of death. And I think it's true that some people want life extension because they're afraid of dying. I think this is a bad motivation. I want to live long because I like being alive. And I think in order to live a long life, you probably need to run towards new, interesting things than away from death. But the problem is, of course, that is a psychological issue. I think most transhumanists I know are pretty life-affirming, but some of them do probably need a bit of therapy to avoid the fear of death. Then there is that question about identity, and I think this is a profound one, because I'm not certain personal identity exists. It certainly is convenient to speak about me as Anders Sandberg, and I have memories of yesterday, I have plans for what I'm going to do tomorrow. I stretch out mentally across the time and space. And when I think about how I changed, some changes are kind of appropriate. I was once a child, then I grew up, and I'm hopefully getting older and slightly wiser. Now, if I were suddenly transformed, so I changed my political views overnight, that might not be the right kind of change. I might say, maybe that it turned me into a different person. Maybe the original Anders' life ended there and a new person showed up. And I think this is also true for change in transhumanism. If I get an extra pair of arms, that probably doesn't change me very much, even though my wardrobe might change. If I upload my mind into a computer, but it still thinks and feels like it did before, it might be a more drastic transfer, but it is still an appropriate one. But there might be other changes that we don't endorse, that we don't find legitimate. And this might also be transformations of society. Some revolutions are legitimate. Some revolutions are not legitimate because they destroy what went before. And this is the challenge in transhumanism. This is an ongoing debate about where do you draw these lines. Then there was the boredom question, and this is linked to that issue of, are we afraid of death or do we want to live life? Because the fear we might have is that we create a utopia and then we're very bored, but we also are afraid of just dying from that. I don't think it's a great risk yet, because there is so much that needs to be done. We're so far away from utopia. I rather have that boredom becomes a problem than having the other problems with death and dying and poverty and malnutrition. The history of science is interesting. So my own current obsession is whole brain emulation, or mind uploading as it's sometimes called. I'm interested in how likely is it that we can scan a brain and make a replica in the computer that thinks in the same way. So this week there was in the science journal Nature a wonderful series of articles demonstrated that now we have scanned the brain of a fruit fly. We actually have a complete map of all the 50,000 nerve cells in the fruit fly brain, and we can even learn a fair bit about how it thinks and even simulate that partially. So on one hand, it's laughably far away from our brain, but this is tremendously much more advanced than what I could do back in the 1990s when we started. This is a field I'm interested in seeing if we can understand and see if we can do in an ethical way. The separation of societies is interesting. One of the things I love about globalization is that I can go anywhere. I can get food from everywhere. But it unfortunately also means that there is a Starbucks coffee store everywhere. There is a McDonald's everywhere. Most places become a bit similar to each other. And a world that is globally connected, even if we make sure that there is different hamburger restaurants, it's still going to become more homogeneous. And that might be a benefit along some dimensions. There are some dimensions like poverty where we want to all be rich. But there are other dimensions where we might want diversity, and we might want ways of safeguarding that diversity. In many ways, the subcultures that existed in the 1990s have disappeared because of the internet and social media to a large degree. We might need to find ways of living in different ways among each other. This is a really important and hard social problem. And the final one, what was that one? I can't read my own handwriting. I need to enhance myself. Can you shout your question again? Paternalism. Yes. Yeah. I think the problem with paternalism is that the kinds of paternalism that we usually recoil at is the ones that forces us and the yells at us to do certain things. But they're also good advice. Sometimes you should listen to the experts. The problem is we have been veering back and forth on this. We used to live in a society where the authorities couldn't be questioned, and that was bad. And we found ways of questioning authorities. And now then we moved over in the other direction, where now nobody accepts any authorities. But reality is out there. There are things in the world that are true no matter what we believe. So it's foolish to disregard all authorities. But obviously now we don't want to go back to having too much paternalism. And this becomes tricky because some questions, there are true answers. There are questions about immunology and vaccines where authorities actually know stuff that is useful. There are questions about how I live my life best, where I'm the only authority and nobody else knows really how I should do it. But still, I have friends and family that can give me advice, sometimes very good advice, because they see the things that I don't see. Again, this is the interesting part of being human. It's very rarely that we can solve these kind of problems. They might not have proper solutions. And even as transhumans, I think we're going to struggle with the transhuman version of the problems. I might have considered, should I get extra arms? And my friends and family can give me an advice. Maybe it's good advice. Maybe they're just thinking that that's just a silly Anders thing. But that interaction is, of course, partially how we think. We're not just thinking in our own brains. We're thinking together with other brains. We just want to ensure that that happens in a nice, friendly way, which is by no means easy. But this is, of course, where the glass of beer at the bar or having tea with your grandmother actually is important for making you function as a human.
We have to end up here. There is another great debate waiting between Jacques Rancière and two philosophers, Jacques Rancière and Andrea Soto. Well, big round of applause. Thank you very much for...
Thank you.